Welcome to the first series of Drop the Dead Donkey. Now, if you're a fan of Drop the Dead Donkey and you can remember the first series, then that makes you really quite old. So we will talk loudly and slowly at times to give you a chance to hang on to what we're saying. Now, this came out in 1990, this first series of Drop the Dead Donkey, and the world was a very different place, and it was dominated by two great comedy legends, two of the finest comic figures of the 20th century, Margaret Thatcher and Saddam Hussein. The Gulf War was on the brew. It was about to happen. And Thatcher, at the time, Thatcher seemed comparatively secure. Nobody really liked her, but nobody really wanted to vote for the opposition, which sounds rather familiar. But she surrounded herself with from a comedy writer's point of view, a rather appealing menagerie of cabinet ministers, didn't she?
Yeah, they weren't sort of as dull and grey as they are these days. They were, I don't know, funnier and sort of uglier.
Drunker?
Drunker, yes,
yeah.
which, you know, they wouldn't be allowed to be in under New Labour. And they had their sort of bottles taken away. And occasionally they used to talk the truth in those days, didn't they? They'd still sort of say what they meant, which was... Yeah. I mean, Nick Ridley was a favourite.
He was my personal favourite. He believed that life was a German conspiracy, didn't he?
Yes, which had lots of sort of fodder because Germans were about to get reunified.
Yes.
So you know, he thought his conspiracy was coming true.
Peter Lilly.
Peter Lilly, who featured heavily in certain series.
Yes, Michael Portillo. I don't know why I bracketed those two together, but they just seemed to go together. Virginia Bottomley.
Who sadly liked the show, didn't she?
Well, she said she did. It was a horrible moment.
We tried to write as many jokes as possible about her after that, so that that we would stop this.
That's right. There was that other John Minor thing. I don't know what actor.
Never remember.
He disappeared
him.
anyway. But yes, so that was the world that we lived in then. Some stories were just as they are now. We were preoccupied with the idea that Saddam Hussein might have loads of chemical weapons he was going to attack us with. George Best was getting drunk on television. Some stories were just beginning to brew up. Mad cow disease was just beginning to poke its way into the public consciousness. The news was just beginning to feature loads of cows wobbling around in an amusing way. And the other thing that was generally in the ether was 1990, of course, was the World Cup, was Gaza's tears and the sort
Pavarotti's song.
Nessun Dorma, everywhere you went. So we hope we've reminded you of what 1990 was like. We might have put you off, you might not want to relive it. But anyway, here it is, the first series of Drop the Dead Donkey in all its glory. We hope you enjoy it. People often ask us, well, they sometimes ask us, where did you get the idea for Drop the Dead Donkey? And me and Guy can honestly say that we can't remember. But what we do know is that probably Drop the Dead Donkey happened because of a show that didn't happen. A show called Wrinkly that we made at Central Television in 1989. And me and Guy had a small, very small independent production company in those days. And we made this pilot and we quite enjoyed the experience of making it, but we did realise that we were maybe not born to be businessmen.
After the third set of VAT returns didn't get in on time, we thought maybe we should let someone else do this.
Yeah, we thought we're heading for prison at least at this rate. So what we did was we moved in with some friends who'd opened a little independent production company that was doing quite well, called Hat Trick Productions. And the first thing that we did for them was Drop the Dead Donkey. Now, the idea that we'd had was that we wanted to do a sitcom set in the workplace. We knew we wanted to do that.
And at that time, I mean, they're now quite familiar, I think, but you could go back 10 years probably.
More,
and I don't think a sitcom had been done in the workplace.
No.
So that element of it was quite original at the time.
I think you'd have to go back to the rag trade or something like that to find a workplace sitcom in those days. The other thing we wanted to do, and we were sure about this, was we wanted to do a show that went out very close to the recording of it.
And the other great advantage of that, of course, is that you know, people don't have, television companies don't have time to fiddle with it.
No.
You know, you deliver it, they've got 24 hours and they have to get it out and we're editing it. And they can't say, actually, I'm not so sure about that plot line, maybe we should change it a bit, maybe we should do this, because it's gone, it's happened. So that's a big plus, really.
The damage is done. Now, we did have a lot of experience of doing shows just before transmission, because we both worked on Not the 9 O'Clock News.
Weekending on radio before that was where we started off completely, really.
Day before transmission, that was made. And we both worked on a Channel 4 comedy show called Who Dares Wins, which was recorded the night before it went out as well. So we had a lot of experience of doing those kind of shows, but never, ever as a situation comedy, which was quite new. So that is how it all began.
Well, the title came about after a long discussion with the broadcasters. We had endless sheets of paper on walls, on desks, everywhere, with scribbles of titles that none of us really liked. And eventually, though, we came up with one that we did like, and it was Dead Belgians Don't Count. We thought that encapsulated the programme. Yeah. Channel 4, not so keen. I think they thought it was a Belgianist.
Yeah, they thought it would adversely affect sales to Belgium, they said.
We did manage to sell it to Belgium. Well, mind you, we changed the title, of course.
Yeah, mind you, maybe they'd have seen the funny side, I don't know. But.
Anyway, they said, you know, the idea's fine, but just come up with a country a bit further away, 3 syllables. So we got out our atlases, 3-syllable countries where nothing happened, and we came up with Dead Kuwaitis Don't Count. This was about 2 months before the first Gulf War, and obviously it's very fortunate that we never ended up going with that. Otherwise, we would have come off the air pretty fast. I think that would have ended our careers, and many other people's careers. It would have been very bad luck.
Although we had a close shave with Dead Kuwaitis, the Swedish broadcasters who made their own version of Drop the Dead Donkey opted for the title Dead Danes Don't Count. And we said, you're mad doing that, because that's like us calling it Dead Scots Don't Count. You know, that is really, you're asking for trouble. They said, no, we think it's very funny. So, unfortunately, they called it that, and after 3 shows, there was a terrible tragedy. A ship went down, a ferry, and there were hundreds of deaths, many of them Danish. And so those poor people, their show basically had to go out without a title for the rest of the series. Journalists were always telling us that they understood what Drop the Dead Donkey meant, which really amused me and Guy.
Well, the story was that there was this donkey which was coming, this ill donkey was coming back, and a paper like the Express or the Standard was financing its return.
A lot of journalists, especially tabloid ones, maintained that it was a reference to the Sun newspaper rescuing a donkey from vile Spaniards who were about to lob him out the window as part of some religious ritual.
And was going to be looked after in England, because England loved donkeys, and nowhere in Europe loved donkeys, and would look after ill donkeys, and then the donkey died just as they were about to. So the editor had to say, drop the dead donkey. The storyline.
Beautiful story, isn't it?
Well, that is a story which you've heard so many times, but you always denied its truth.
Well, because it's bollocks. It used to get mangled sometimes, the title. We did hear it get mangled a few times. In fact, my dad used to, I don't know if he did it to annoy me, but he used to call it, he used to say to me, are you doing any more of that Drop the Dead Monkey?
Oh, well, interestingly, if you go into the Virgin in the King's Road, the DVDs are for sale there behind a little placard that says Drop the Dead Monkey. So maybe your dad had something to do with that.
Anyway, but that is how the title came about. It was nonsense. So if anyone tries to tell you they know what it means, they're bullshitting.
We spent a day doing research at the BBC newsroom, because it was going to be made for the BBC originally, so they very generously let us shadow them. We went to the news conferences. We had great fun rifling through their obituaries.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, most of the people in there were fairly elderly, the Queen Mother and so on, Mrs. Thatcher. That's probably just wishful thinking at the time, but the one that was baffling was Ian Botham. He was the only young person in there. I don't know quite what they knew about him, but
well, he
anyway.
liked to live life in the fast lane, didn't he, maybe? But we'd gone there hoping that there'd be some display of terrible tantrums or unreasonable behaviour, people under pressure. In fact, for the most of the day, it was very calm and rather dull. But it did warm up towards the end as the 6 o'clock news came hurtling towards them and as the deadline approached. And as they were trying to prioritise their news stories for the bulletin, a story came in that a man had been shot in Belfast, but that was all that they had at the time. So the deputy editor was asking the editor, well, what should we do about this story? And the editor was putting it off and saying, oh, I need to concentrate on this. But finally, at like 5 minutes to 6, the deputy editor said, look, what are we going to do about this man shot in Belfast? And the editor said, what? He said, this man, he's been shot in Belfast. And the editor said, well, is he dead? What's happened? Is he dead? He said, no, I don't think so. He said, I think he's just badly hurt. He said, shall we put him in or not? And the editor said, look, if he's dead, he's in.
That sort of encapsulated that mood that we were trying to capture in the newsroom. I suppose also, in a way, gave us a title.
Yeah.
We wanted Drop the Dead Donkey to be a sort of shout like that under pressure.
We wanted the title to sound like, if he's dead, he's in. Mm. One of the most important things on any new venture, particularly a comedy, is finding the right director. And we met lots of directors for Drop the Dead Donkey, very reputable, very good directors, but we hadn't met anyone who we felt was as excited about doing the show as we were. Mm. We were a bit stumped, and then Denise O'Donoghue, who's the chief executive of Hat-Trick Productions, the production company, said to us one day, she said, there's this woman who lives in our street, and she's a bit balmy, but I think she's very talented, and I think you would get on.
I think we went to the meeting sort of without high hopes, frankly, because as you know, qualities of directors go, living in the same street as your executive producer isn't a great one, really.
No,
but as soon as we met her, then I think both in terms of personality and excitement and you know, sort of instant vision for the show and ways of doing it differently. She just, you know, there was no doubt, was there?
Yeah, it's very hard to describe Liddy to anyone who's never met her, but she was this tremendously exuberant, creative sort of whirlwind, and she was great fun to work with, and also extremely talented director. And as you watch the first series of Drop the Dead Donkey, you can see the choices she made. She was quite prepared to take risks on her shooting style, but it was always very inventive. And there's a moment that involves some Viking helmets that you'll see late on in the series, which is a very daring choice of shot that actually me and Guy, left to our own devices, probably wouldn't have gone for. And the other thing that Liddy was brilliant at was she was fantastic with people. It didn't matter who they were, whether they were one of the stars of the show or a runner or anybody. She treated everybody exactly the same, and so it made for a very happy team. And I can honestly say that over the 9 years or so that we worked on the show, she was probably the most important part of the team spirit of the show. Now sadly we lost Liddy. She died a few years ago, and we all miss her very much, but she was very, very crucial part of the success of Drop the Dead Donkey.
Well, the topicals were a very important part of the show. They're, you know, adding those stories at the last moment. Jokes about the news that we tried to put into the fabric of the show. We recorded, when did we record the first series? On a Wednesday, was it?
Yes, the Thursday transmission.
The Thursday transmission. So while we were rehearsing it in the week, we kept coming up with news stories and putting them in. The cast would rehearse them, and then as the news stories changed, as we found better jokes, we'd add those, right up to the night of the record sometimes. If a big story broke, then we'd be, you know, handing out new bits of paper to the cast, just as they were going on.
Yeah.
I mean, partly to terrify them, partly to you know, give them a
sort of blood sport.
Yes.
And we used to call them topical gag holes, and they used to walk across and they'd have letters next to them. So in the script, there'd be dialogue, and then it would say topical gag hole A, and actors would walk across the set in mid-sentence and go topical gag hole A, and we wouldn't fill them sometimes till quite late. So it was pretty intimidating for the cast.
I remember the gag holes were there. They were denoted, weren't they, in the script? So when we had our first read through, we knew there would be gaps. We knew that at
George
some point,
brings in topical A, Gus brings in
topical A,
B,
topical B, topical C,
yeah.
and we'd have the writers sitting there waiting to fill those gaps over the week, and the stories would change, slip and slide as things came into the news and went out of the news, and certain times they'd be bumped up the news, as in a real news situation, and sometimes on a Tuesday, by the time we got from Friday to Tuesday, they were fine-tuning them the day before we went into the studio.
You could never get precious about your lines, could you?
No, because you'd have a really good joke, and it would just be gone. Yeah.
But the effect of them was very instant. I mean, certainly the newspapers and everybody spotted very quickly that these were characters who were talking about the same things that they were talking about on the train home or in the pub that evening. You know, it had an immediacy that was very successful.
The topicality was a big part of the show early on, and was the sort of tag that got people watching. And journalists are as vain as everybody else and liked being talked about, therefore they talked about us. But as the show went on, I think we cut back on the topical stuff. You got lazy, or we just didn't need it as much, or something.
I think people imagine they were a much greater part of the show than they actually were.
Yes.
I mean, of the sort of 24 minutes of Drop the Dead Donkey, probably we never put more than 3 or 4 minutes in. But because of that immediacy, I think people came away with the feeling that they were, you know, a quarter of the show or half the show, which they weren't.
I mean, in the first series, we tended to lump the topicals together in clumps a bit more. As time went by, we got better at kind of actually bedding them into the show.
We'd put sort of Henry's very angry about something and make it reflected in a topical story.
Yes, we sort of linked them to the narrative of the episode rather than just people trading jokes.
The reaction to the show was instantly pretty good, which was a relief really, because of course we were still making it as the crits were coming out. So I think if it had been panned, the morale on the set would
have dipped a bit.
A little bit, yeah. I do remember after 3 weeks, the Independent wrote a piece calling us overrated.
Yeah, after 3 weeks.
Which was very early to be rated at all, I thought. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that actually was rather
And they continued to say that for the whole 6 series. We were overrated from the beginning. And we never got to the bottom of that. We can only presume that somebody had slept with somebody's girlfriend or something.
We have our suspicions
like
of it
that.
was, but we won't reveal that on this DVD.
Yeah. As with any new comedy series, there were a few complaints, but nothing very remarkable, apart from one, which was a fax from Conservative Central Office complaining about a joke that we had made about the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. And I can distinctly remember the actual wording of this fax from Conservative Central Office. It began with the sentence, "This will be one of thousands of complaints that you will receive about this scurrilous joke you made about Margaret Thatcher." And we were a little bit concerned, actually, because this angry fax had been copied to Michael Braid, the head of Channel 4, and we thought maybe we would be in deep water here. So we rang Channel 4 and asked them to send us the list of phone calls that had been after the show had gone out to see how many calls there'd been. And there'd been 3. 3 calls. One person had rung to praise the same joke that Conservative Central Office was complaining about. And the other 2 calls were to ask where Sally Smedley got the dress that she wore in part 2. And that was the sum total of the overnight complaints, which, looking back, was a bit of a social indicator that Mrs. Thatcher was in more trouble than she knew, because the joke was fairly rude about her, and nobody had bothered to pick up the phone and complain. So I think already she was destined for that terrible fate that she had, where her own party stabbed her in the back and the front and the side.
There was one other, that's a terrible reaction on the first series Do you remember when Virginia Bottomley said it was her favourite programme?
That was awful.
That left us all a bit despondent.
And it's not as if we haven't been rude about it. We'd even pointed out that Virginia Bottomley was an anagram of "I'm an evil Tory bigot," and nonetheless, I think she was just trying to be trendy.
Probably.
We were becoming fashionable, and typical politician, she just decided that she'd get a bit of the action.
I think so. Yeah.
But it makes my blood run cold just thinking about all that. But hopefully, a lot of you viewers won't remember who Virginia Bottomley was.
But what did you write? You wrote something.
Acting is a minefield.
Acting is a minefield. That's right. I thought it was acting was a battleground.
Well, I did that as well. Well, it was.
It was penciled and it stayed for something like 9
I
years.
used to carve it on the desk.
Every time they brought the tables out.
truism.
And if the table wasn't in the right place, you used to move it
That's
back,
right.
so you had it in your corner.
Well, you see, what I wanted to do was always put my little seat in the middle, the read-through, and then try to stay there, for parish notices and all the rest of it. But, people like Hayden Gwynn and yourself, as I recall, tried to elbow me out.
Well, we were in Maida Vale, weren't we, for
the first series?
We were in a rough area. We were in a school in Paddington, wasn't it?
We were. We got nits.
We did, I remember that.
Or at least some
Happy
of us got
days.
nits, and we never knew who it was because they kept it from us. There were lots of kids in the school downstairs. We had a rehearsal room upstairs, and then it must have come after the first show or the second show. Or something.
Yeah.
It was
Show
somewhere
one.
during that series.
Show one, the makeup artist came up to me very
Said,
Rob
quietly
Duncan
and
was
said,
featured on the bottle of knit shampoo
Yeah.
from his early modelling days. I remember that.
the makeup artist sidled up to us and said, "Bit of a problem, the cast have got nits, we'll tell them after the show."
How we suffered.
Yeah, we probably gave them to the kids. Actually, it was probably that way around.
Yeah. Damien's filming was pre-recorded, so the first time we got to meet Jeff, he thought I was the cameraman because of the way I was dressed. He looked really surprised to see me at the read-through.
He got your name into his head after about 3 series.
Yeah. You can't rush these things.
I don't think I'd ever met such strongly applied standards in terms of writing and direction. It's true. I could see Guy giggling away.
Shut up.
No, it's
You're not getting paid more for saying this,
I'm speaking from the brain and from the heart. It's
explains
absolutely
it.
true. And I think that was not an unimportant factor in the huge success of the show. Do you dispute that?
You're about to watch something that really, quite frankly, you shouldn't be allowed to watch because it was supposed to be a secret. It's what's called an off-air pilot, which is a dummy run. It's where you get to practice making your program before it spews out into people's living rooms. Now, we did this a few weeks before we recorded the first series of Drop the Dead Donkey in 1990. We did it because we knew, as a new show with a topical element in it, that there were loads of things that we really needed to practice.
Yeah, I mean, we thought it was going to work, but we didn't know. I think the main thing that we wanted to have a go at was putting in the topical jokes, the jokes that we added on the day before, about news stories that had happened. We wanted to try and see if they would fit into the fabric of the show. We also, Lydia Oldroyd, who was shooting this, was shooting it in a very innovative and unusual way for a sitcom at that stage. Now it probably looks quite familiar, but then I think what she was doing was really quite unusual, and we wanted to try that out.
What do you remember about the pilot?
The what?
The pilot.
The
The pilot.
The pilot. What's the pilot?
Give him a break.
The pilot.
That was like a car crash.
It was, and it still happens. We used to say, didn't we, if we ever got a bit cocky, put that episode back on.
Yes, put it back on.
Watch it the night before you're doing
Yeah.
something else.
You can't release that.
Somebody
You have to
told me.
escape.
Yeah, no, the pilot's going to be in this, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, God. first episode, which was a pilot, no one was going to see it, remember?
That's right.
Don't worry about
untransmittable, they said.
Yes.
But it became
They didn't say that.
non-transmittable.
They said no one was going to see it. We just wanted to see whether it works, logistics and all the rest of it. And of course, it was a pile of old dung, wasn't it?
Terrible.
It was
We were
awful.
just so dreadful.
It
Well,
was
I
like-
mean, I speak for myself, but I
I
was
was
perfectly dreadful and put my hand up.
Rob sweating a lot. He sweated.
Oh, it was like the
He
scene
made his
in Airplane.
He made his first entrance. It looked like he was coming in from the monsoon, and he just got wetter over the next 30
It was
minutes.
fantastic.
I
Very
remember
broad brushstrokes.
I remember appearing in the doorway and it looked as if I'd just come out of a scuba tank. I was just covered in water. And everybody was covered in water.
You know they're going to dig this one out. and
Yeah,
put
they
a
are,
stick
they
in
are,
on
I
the
know.
back.
So that's what you're about to see. It's our practice, and all we would say is be kind and do remember that this was everybody's first day at work.